the reason I wanted to have a quick Substack live today is basically this whole Epstein thing. Um, Thank you. Thanks for the love hearts. Has kind of taken a bit of a turn now in the last couple of days. And I have to admit that even though I followed MAGA very closely for years, I'm on Twitter, a lot of the heart of MAGA is on Twitter. That's kind of their natural home, especially since Elon took over. But even before then, they loved Twitter. Hi, Kerry. Hi, Rick. Nice to see you. So being on Twitter, there's a lot of MAGA influencers on there, right? People like Laura Loomer, who's kind of like the Rasputin of the MAGA movement. She's like this, weird thing, person that sort of goes around with conspiracy theories and all that. People like Benny Johnson, these people have millions of views. They're friends with Donald Trump. And in the last week, they've actually been calling out Donald Trump in regards to the Epstein list or the files and not releasing them. And I have to admit, even though I followed MAGA very closely for years, and I was very, very skeptical that they would ever turn on Trump, a lot of these MAGA influencers did start, right? They did start to say some things about Trump that I normally wouldn't hear, right? So so when it first started, they were calling out Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and all the people around Trump. But what I wasn't expecting is then after a while, as Trump couldn't get away with it, it kind of got stuck in the media, right? He tried everything to move on from the Epstein files. He did all the usual stuff to try to divert attention, but it was sticking. And Trump knew enough to know that it was sticking. So, hi, Lost Vibes. Nice to see you. And he knew enough that it was sticking, and so he had to sort of do something to sort of change it a bit. But before then, the MAGA online influencers were actually naming Trump by name, but they were doing it in like a night. They were doing it in the sense of, "Oh, come on, Trump, you need to do." They never implicated him in terms of he's in the Epstein files or that he's done something wrong. It was always more like the people around him are manipulating him not to release it, or come on, you need to do the right thing. So it was always in a softly way. And so I did, for a moment there, started thinking that they might splinter a bit, MAGA, the MAGA group, which is highly unusual because there's pretty much nothing that I would have thought that Trump could have done that would have made people like, oh, okay, they're not going to support him anymore. But then finally, in the last couple of days, Trump seems to have got the story to come out, to go out of the media, or at least with his influencers, a lot. And it didn't take a lot, to be honest with you. Basically, he did his favorite subject. Trump's favorite subject is always Russiagate, right? Hi, Mary. Nice. Thanks for joining. It's always Russiagate. He always goes back to 2016, 2007 Russiagate, the Mueller report and all that. He's obsessed with that. I don't know if you remember, but during the Oval Office, that incident with Zelensky in the Oval Office, where him and JD Vance are berating Zelensky, saying that he's going to start World War III, all this sort of stuff. This is after Trump basically called him a dictator days before. So, and during that interview, during that time, they were constantly talking. Trump actually brought up Russiagate, right? And so during that, Zelensky, he goes, "Oh, this is, I feel sorry for Putin because they implicated, like Putin during Russiagate. They said that we were colluding together." So he was like sympathetic towards like Putin during that whole Zelensky thing, and like basically saying that he was implicated in Russiagate, and so was Putin. So they were both done wrong during that. So again, he went back to the old classics to try to get out of this. And to be honest with you, it's actually kind of working to some degree. I don't know what degree, but it seems to have moved. So basically by saying that getting Tulsi Gabbard, who had fallen out with Trump because of Iran, and she's been very, very quiet for a long time since the Iranian thing, she's basically got herself back in the good books with Trump by doing this BS story about in 2016 how the Obama administration had tried to implicate Donald Trump and say the only reason he won was basically because Russia helped because basically because Russia was helping Trump win the election and all that sort of stuff, and they called it treasonous. Right now, what's interesting about the story is if you hear MAGA talking about it, they're pretending like this story is a brand new story, but it isn't. It's actually a recycled story that they've been talking about since 2016. Hi, Amber. Nice to see you. And they constantly do this story over and over again. It's just a recycled story. So there's nothing new to the story, right? But then what they do, hi, Natasha. Good to see you again, Natasha. And what they do, so Natasha, we're talking about Tulsi Gabbard, trying to divert attention, and basically what he's trying to do, and what she's trying to do is basically divert the attention away by bringing up the whole Russiagate, because he really thinks he's got a Russia, he can really work with this, and it does get the base going a lot because the whole Russiagate Mueller report thing, it's something like they feel like they got to win, and the reason they feel like they got to win because the end of the Mueller report. Hi Sue, thanks for joining. The end of the Mueller report actually said there was no collusion, right? And obviously the Steele dossier, the PP tape and all that was bullshit, right? That stuff was bullshit. But there was a lot of stuff in there that wasn't BS, and that was the stuff about the fact that Russia was trying to interfere in the elections in 2016. And that's not just coming from the Democrats. There was actually a congressional investigation that was actually involved Marco Rubio, right, who's now obviously working for Trump, and they all came out with the conclusion that Russia, again, this was a bipartisan thing between the Republicans and the Democrats, and came out to the conclusion that Russia was trying to interfere in the 2016 election, but they never got to the stage of hacking machines or anything like that. Although they used social media to try to get it across and things like that. So basically they said they tried, but they weren't very successful. That was kind of the outcome of the bipartisan thing, right? So now trying to make it out like, it was treasonous of Obama is it's just hilarious. And I think a lot of the influencers online who were criticizing Trump recently, they know it's BS. They know this story is not going to go anywhere. They're talking about arrests. They're like, hi Jenny. They're now talking about basically releasing files. This is such an obvious tactic, right? So what they're doing, this is so obvious, is they're trying to replace the Epstein files with the Obama files, right? So they're going to start. And the thing about MAGA is you just release stuff, like you put stuff into the internet, like files, just pieces of paper and stuff, and they lose their mind. They go, oh, they got the receipts and whatever. They don't have any idea what's in those files. They couldn't probably read the files. They don't understand the files, but they just see stuff that's been released, right? Because let's face it, MAGA have peanut brains. And I don't mean this as an insult, and a little bit as an insult, but, I think it's just the fact that, they moved on so easily. And anybody, even a 10-year-old, could have seen that the reason this recycled story, again, so a story that's been out there for like years and years, got any traction and has kind of moved on. It's kind of moved on from the Epstein files now, is because Trump was able to replace the Epstein files with the so-called Obama, or I think it's going to be called the Obama files, right? So they needed something else, right? That was kind of conspiratorial, that they can talk about the files and stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, that's all they really care about. They never had any interest in the Epstein files in terms of finding out the truth. The only reason that Trump and MAGA, specifically MAGA, Kash Patel, were interested in the Epstein files, is because they thought it was going to implicate Democrats and liberals. That's the only reason they were interested in the Epstein files. If they thought it was going to get Bill Clinton, right, and then it was going to get Donald Trump, they wouldn't have been interested in this at all, right? Hi, Louise. Thanks for joining. They wouldn't have been interested at all. They were only interested because all over social media and everywhere it was all about, oh, when Trump gets elected, there's going to be like Democrats running for the Hill and liberals are going to be running for the Hill. Tom Hanks, they're going to get Tom Hanks. Stephen Hawkins is going to be implicated. So all these sort of stuff, like this fantasy world, because even though there's a lot of truth to the Epstein stuff. There's also a lot of mythology that goes along with it, right? I mean, and a lot of that mythology came from QAnon. And the mythology around the Epstein files and Alex Jones and that was always that there was a cabal of super rich elites, right, who were almost all Democrats, were liberals, right? So that was a big part of it. Was very politicized, right? And so that's what got the base so excited, because if they thought it was going after both sides, there's no way in hell they would have been interested in that, right? So it was one of the biggest, in my opinion, own goals, self-owns that I've ever seen politically in my life, because here you had this very excited base, right, about releasing the files, and you got this, and their dear leaders probably sitting there going, I wish these guys would not be obsessed with this. I mean, be obsessed with the MLK files, the JFK files, whatever, but not this one. This was a very awkward situation for Trump. But of course, Trump pandered to a lot of these groups. So when he went on Joe Rogan last year, he went on all these podcasts, and a lot of these people like Joe Rogan, a lot of people around him, they're very conspiratorial, and so they had a lot of interest in Epstein. They had a lot of interest in anything to do with conspiratorial stuff. They kind of believed that some of the QAnon stuff, but they also believed that it was more of they're going after Democrats. The way I've always looked at the Epstein thing is, if they find Bill Clinton did something wrong, then press charges against Bill Clinton. I mean, I'm not going to defend Bill Clinton, you know. I'm not going to wouldn't do it. And I wouldn't, and by the way, I would, if Bill Clinton started coming out and saying, you know what, I'm going to release this, I would be skeptical of that, right? Because I know he had a past relationship. I have no idea if he did anything wrong, right? But the fact of the matter is, how is it possible that you can put yourself behind Trump, who had one of the closest relationships to Epstein than anybody else? Like, Kamala Harris had no relationship, right, to Epstein. Joe Biden had no relationship to Epstein, but they got behind the guy who basically said that Epstein is a terrific guy. I've known him for 15 years, right? And he happens to like women on the younger side. Like, that's the guy that they got behind, like, to expose the Epstein files. Was just hilarious. And it just goes to show that MAGA really haven't really thought that through on things like that. So I think MAGA is trying to now connect the Epstein files with, and trying to get rid of the Epstein files, and now talking about Obama. Is it working? I think it is working. If you look online now, a lot of the MAGA influencers have moved on now that are obsessed with arresting Barack Obama. That's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. It was just a diversionary thing. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard is probably, in my opinion, I kind of dislike her more than Trump in some ways, because she comes from the Democrats, right? And she's just so dishonest, right? She would know 100%, right, that what she's saying about Barack Obama is false. She would 100% know that. But she's trying to get back in the good books, right, with Trump after what he did. So basically now he's kind of like, she's basically doing whatever she thinks she can get back into the books. And this massive lie is one way to get in there. So I think, I think from one point of view, I think she's basically, she has no credibility whatsoever anymore. But I think to some degree it is working. The Wall Street Journal story that came out, which is obviously a Murdoch-owned newspaper, I think is another way he's going to try to get out of this, because he's going to connect it as a fake news story. So he's basically going to say this is a fake story, right? A fake news story that came out, and basically there's no evidence. I didn't draw pictures of women. That's not how I talk. And what's happening now is a lot of the people on the MAGA side who were criticizing him for the Epstein files are now trying to say, well, if they're lying, if they're lying about this, the Wall Street Journal, then how do we know they're not lying about the Epstein files? So this is kind of trying to throw some mud into the whole story about the Epstein files. And that's why I think it's gaining some traction. So he's diverting the attention by using the Wall Street Journal thing, and also the Obama thing, and they're falling for it. So I, it's should I be surprised? No, I'm not actually surprised. But it's happening. It's working. I actually thought for a moment there that he was actually, let's talk to all the women who are victims, Car. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, Car. Like, it's amazing that um hi, Jacqueline. Thanks for joining. It's amazing that like they they're so obsessed with that, right? So the whole thing, going back a little bit, the whole thing with the Epstein thing was it was mostly always a a MAGA thing, a Republican thing, right? It was more of their thing than it was Democrats. I didn't know many Democrats were constantly obsessed with talking about Epstein, right? I'm sure we wanted the files to, more information, stuff like that, but we weren't super obsessed with it like the way they were. So the way Trump has tried to like hilariously like talk about it is that this whole thing was a Democrat hoax. That makes no sense because Democrats weren't the one going on podcasts and talking about releasing the files before the election. Those people were Dan Bongino, Kash Patel. They were going on all these different podcasts. Dan Bongino had a podcast that was very popular and he made millions of dollars in advertising. Thanks, Carl. And all he talked about on that podcast before he was elected, right, and going with Joe Rogan was talking about how we need to release the Epstein files and anybody who's trying to hide it are complicit. So that's what he's saying about the Biden administration. He's saying they're complicit because they won't release it. Um, Donald Trump Jr. tweeted out last year, right, that anybody who doesn't release all the files is basically hiding pedophiles. He literally said that. Now his dad is doing that. Suddenly, there's nothing here. It's a Democratic hoax. Now, it makes no sense because if it was a Democratic hoax, all we would have heard for the last is Dan Bongino leaving, or he has decided to stay. I think Sue, there's no evidence that he's leaving. I think he's staying. I actually don't think he's gonna. I think the thing with Dan Bongino is he always talks about how hard his job is. Like he's always talking about how he's got no free time. It's like he was expecting just to show up and do like podcasts and talk about stuff like this, but not actually do proper work. So I wouldn't be surprised if he left because of that, because it's harder work. He's having to do more work than he thought he was going to have to do. But I don't think he's going to go because of the Epstein thing. I think basically at the end of the day, I think the Trump has got away with it. I don't think, I think when I say he's got away with it, I mean, he's got away with it with the MAGA base. He hasn't got away with it with the swing voters, and he hasn't got away with it with high Nudger, and he hasn't got away with it with the independents, because there were a selective amount of independents and swing voters who did vote for Donald Trump, right? They did actually vote for him. And those people you would not consider part of MAGA. And those people, I think, will jump or they won't vote at all, right? So this is for me, when I look at this in terms of who's going to vote at the midterms, I don't think Trump will go at the next elections. And what couple of reasons? One, it's going to be like really hard to do. But secondly, he's not in the best of health. So if he's, look at how unhealthy he is at the moment with his feet and the veins and everything, swollen ankles and all that. He's going to be way worse in 3.5 years. He's not going to, at his age, he's not going to reverse backwards, right? So, hi, Melissa. Thanks for joining. So I don't think, honestly, at this stage, I don't think Trump is going to run again. But what I think he will do is he will appoint someone who will basically be like his surrogate. So he won't be in power himself, but he'll go and do a lot of rallies. He'll do, so it'll be like Trump is running himself, but he's not officially running. So, and this other person will be like, now the only competition to that could be a third lane, which is Tucker Carlson. Because I do believe that a lot of people now that we're like 6 months in and Trump has done the Epstein files things, he bombed Iran, he's supporting Israel more than so. There are in the right wing group. There's like a populist right wing area. These people like Tucker Carlson, that sort of group. Um, so yeah, so they've been critical of Trump recently. I do think if anybody right could run against a Trump candidate, it could be Tucker Carlson. He's extremely popular in the party. Um, and he's actually distancing himself from Trump at the moment, not to a full degree, not to sort of not completely, but enough that he can run at the next elections and say, well, because the problem with Kamala Harris had at the last election was she couldn't distance herself from Biden. So remember she was asked, "Oh, what would you have done differently?" and she didn't say anything. So I think when someone new runs, you've got to be able to criticize the previous person. Otherwise, what's the point of voting for that new person? Hi, Pat. So I think in those terms, right? I think Tucker Carlson is setting himself up to run, but not as a Trump candidate. And I do actually think he might do all right. Although Tucker Carlson is a very online figure, he's not as well known in the mainstream world. So, but we'll see sort of what happens with that. But I think at the end of the day, I don't think Trump's going to run again. And I think that's a big problem for MAGA because not everyone can do what Trump does. Like JD Vance has no charisma, right? And he when he talks and he just sounds like a bureaucrat. He sounds like I was a Morley too, Pat, before I got married. Oh, sorry, you guys talking about shit. But yeah, I see. So I do see a lot of that. I do see that Trump, possibly and MAGA could dissolve a little bit at the next election. I think MAGA will still be a big part of it. If you look at the moment, should we be concerned about JD and his connection with the Teals? Yeah, I do. I think the connection with the Teals, the Elon Musk, those people, the sort of the billionaires from South Africa. There's a whole group of billionaires who come from South Africa, right? Who are very concerned about crime in South Africa, but they're only concerned about crime for white people in South Africa, which is a little bit like weird because I've been to South Africa, and let me just say this: that South Africa, the country that South Africa migrates to the most, is my country, Australia, because we're quite geographically we're not as far away, but also culturally we're a little bit similar. I'm just as worried about Vance too as about Trump. Yeah, I wouldn't be. Look. I don't think they have the same charisma, right? I don't think that Vance and Till has the same charisma as Trump did in terms of the MAGA cult. When I look at Vance and I look at Till, I just don't think they can do what he did, and I don't think money these days is as important as it used to be. The main thing to win elections these days is because look at Bloomberg, right? Bloomberg always runs. He's one of the richest guys on the planet, right? Bloomberg. But he doesn't beat 2%. Why? Because you need more than money to win elections. You need charisma, you need appeal, you need a good story, and just being rich is not enough, right? Elon Musk helped Trump in last year. But then after the election, he became less popular with Doge and all that. I agree with that, but there's been so much damage done to democracy. Oh, yeah, I do. I think so, Melissa, but I think the midterms could change. I mean, could change that a little bit. I think it's interesting to see what happened with Elon Musk is that when he tried to pump, we had a couple of special elections, or America had a couple of special elections this year, and Democrats always do well in special elections. And Elon, because he was like on this big high from the election, he went there and tried to, he endorsed the candidates. He basically, helped them out, gave them millions of dollars, and they lost. In fact, they lost bigger because Elon helped them. So having money and being someone like Elon or Till and things like that could actually work in the Democrats' favor because one of the biggest problems Democrats had in 2024 and 2016 was they were considered the establishment. They were considered the insiders, right? And Trump in 2016 was considered the outsider. And for some reason, America a whole bunch of Americans have had like 30%, about 30% of Americans who voted for Trump, I think, for Trump in 2024. So not the majority, but a percentage of Americans had short-term memory loss and they voted for him again. And they voted for him because they actually believed that he was the the outsider again. So to win elections these days, and if you look at Zoran Mamdani in New York, he also ran as the outsider. So running as the outsider is a really important thing these days, especially, and not just in America, but in Australia, Europe, Scandinavia, England, all those countries. There is a big thing about incumbent governments, insiders, establishment, and once you get tainted with that, and the other person is the outsider. Hi, Willem. It's much harder to win their elections these days. I wait till the red states start losing everything. But you're so correct, Joe, with the short term memory. Yeah, yeah. Look, one of the biggest problems in America is um, is the electoral college, right? You have the electoral college vote, and the electoral college thing is a big problem because you have to pander to Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, all that, and they're not like California or that. Most of them are uh, economically sort of progressive in some ways. Like they're very populist because a lot of working class people live in that area, but also they're socially conservative. And a lot of people voted for Trump based on vibes. They voted for him based on Kamala is an insider. And look, Kamala did look like an insider. She did look like an establishment. And for some reason, we agree, Car. It was like everyone just forgot everything from the first. Yeah, we've got to start being I think Democrats need to start becoming the outsiders again, right? And that's how you kind of win. But it's it's an easier argument for Trump to make to say he's the outsider, right? Because Trump does so many stupid things and he says so many authoritarian things, right? And he does things that that any normal person would go, okay, well, I don't want. Okay, I'm all for an outsider. I'm all for someone who's against the system. I'm all for someone, but I'm not for that. And so what happens is Democrats start looking like they're the insiders, right? And Trump is the outsider. So but we're not actually, and because we're the ones saying, look, let's protect government, let's protect the systems, and he's saying, no, let's smash government. So from a vibes point of view, when you've got a whole bunch of people in the mid states, right? And they're not really following politics like you and I are. They're just following them peripherals. They're not following all the details of what's going on. They base it on vibes and what the tiny amount of information they get. Remember, these days most people aren't watching news every day, right? So they're probably on TikTok and they get some story and stuff like that. Now, a lot of these people, if you're a working class person, right, from Wisconsin or that, you don't working class people working in like those sort of jobs, they don't want to go for the establishment candidate, right? They want the outsider. Now, we all know that Trump is a con artist and a liar and things like that. But in 2016, I'll tell you this great story. 2016, this is where I think Hillary and this is when I think Hillary lost the election, right? She basically went to a lot of the states up top and started talking about Trump being a bad person, culturally bad and all that, he's a racist and all that. Now, I get that. He's a racist and all that. But when you go to those working class areas, what they want to hear is, are you going to bring our jobs back from China? What are you going to do for us economically? So you have Hillary going to those Rust Belt states and talking about Trump being a bad person. And then you have Trump going up there and saying, I'm going to bring your jobs back from China. So we have to understand the reality of what you're dealing with, when you're talking about the electoral college system. You can't go there. You can't win in Pennsylvania by saying Trump's a bad person. You can only win there by giving them a better economic outcome for them, right? Offering them something economically, right? That's the only way you're going to win those Rust Belt states. And it's also a good way to get around the cultural stuff, right? Because a lot of those areas, like they might be like, I don't really like the idea of trans people in sport, or I don't, the cultural stuff. And MAGA tried to make the whole campaign about cultural stuff, vibes, culture and vibes, not about the details, right? And that's a much easier campaign to run. MAGA don't live in reality. Yeah, they don't. And they don't pay attention to reality. Now, I do think that at the last election, you had your MAGA base, right? Then you had people who don't generally vote a lot. So, for example, he picked up a lot of young people that would usually vote Democrats. He picked up a lot of working class people and who would generally vote Democrats. And he did that by going on Joe Rogan and all that shows. A lot of a lot of truck drivers, because they're in the car, in the truck for like 5, 6, for hours a day, they just put on the Joe Rogan podcast and listen to it for 4 hours. And, they get stuck in that world. And because Joe Rogan spent so much time shitting on Democrats and he supported Trump, they just went along with it. And they weren't looking at the actual details of what Trump was saying and what Kamala has. Because on the Vives, that's exactly right, Joe. And they also said Kamala couldn't string two sentences together, which was just ridiculous. Yeah. Now, I will say, Melissa, I don't think the Democrats did themselves any favors by being really conservative with Kamala about where they would let her talk. They were way too conservative because if you think about this, Melissa, when Biden left because the debate was a show and he couldn't communicate properly. Whatever you think about it, he just could. There's no way. Yeah, totally. Yeah, he couldn't communicate. So then you replace Biden because he can't communicate properly, and then you bring Kamala in who can communicate properly, but then you hide her, or you'd only allowed her to go out occasionally. It's like it's like a continuation of Joe and then someone else who's better, but still you're trying to hide him. What they should have done, in my opinion, is put Kamala everywhere. I mean, everywhere. And then they couldn't run that whole thing about, she doesn't want to go on this show because she can't string two sentences together, or she doesn't want to go on this show because, she can't have it, I agree. Yeah. And by holding her back car, exactly, they made it worse for her and they made it harder for her, right? Because what happened is, I think I've talked about this before. During the debate, she did fantastic in that debate, right? But then she beat Trump, right? And it was going against the narrative of she can't talk. But the problem is after that is they went back to hiding her again, right? And so they could do so if you don't actually go out and tell your own story, the other side will define you. And they will, and the reason they could define Kamala as word salad and that is because she wasn't out there enough to push it back. If she was out there every day doing not just commercial TV like network TV, but podcasts, and not just friendly podcasts. And I'm not talking about Joe Rogan. Just go anywhere you're allowed to go. Anywhere, right? Because a lot of people these days, they're not watching CNN or MSNBC. They're watching cooking shows or sports shows or shows about podcasts about just everyday people. She needed to go everywhere to get the eyeballs on her. And if she was everywhere and talking every day, they couldn't have done the word salad thing. They couldn't have done she's too scared, right? And that was the big thing that they tried to do against her. So, in fact, they made it harder for her to win that election. But I think moving forward to the next election, I do think it's going to have to be someone who really knows how to communicate. Someone like, I'm not saying Zoran Mandami. I don't know how well he would do in the mid states. I think he might struggle a bit in places like Pennsylvania and places like that. But I mean in terms of how he uses social media, and I mean in terms of how he communicates. And it showed during the New York election, right? When you saw him with Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo, and you see them all together, it's like he made them look old. He made them look, from a bygone era, right? And it really showed. And then now you got Andrew Cuomo going out there, trying to pretend like he's now the new Zoran Mandami. He's now going on TikTok and all that. But it just looks so contrived. You can tell it's not him naturally, right? So you can't. There is one good thing about modern day politics is that money is important, but it's not the most. It's not just money. It's being able to get attention from people, and you can't just do that by having money. You can't turn Bloomberg because otherwise people like Elon and people like Bloomberg and people like Peter Thiel or any of these people, they couldn't run. They wouldn't run because they're not born in America. But even if you had someone like who was born in America, I don't think if Bill Gates ran for president, I don't think he'd win. Right? He hasn't got the charisma. He hasn't got there's a lot of conspiracies out there about him. I just don't think he would win. So that's the good part is that it's not just about money, even though I think money still is important. you've got to have the right messaging. You got to be saying the right things, and that. I think that's a big part of modern day. And you can bypass the networks now. You don't have to just go on CNN or Fox News and all that. You can now go directly and talk to people, which I think is a really, really like big thing at the moment. I think it's a good thing, and it's a thing that I don't think Trump is even though Trump went on a lot of these shows like Joe Rogan and all that, right? Um, I don't think Trump actually likes those shows because when Tucker Carlson recently came out and criticized Trump for bombing Iran, right? He said on TV, Trump said, "Why doesn't Tucker go on a proper show and say that?" Right? So what he's saying is that Tucker's saying it online because he has an online show, but he won't go on network TV and say that like CNN, Fox News, and stuff like that. So to Trump, he's still of that old world. He was pushed into doing podcasts by probably his son Barron, who lives in that world, advisors, people like his son Don Jr. And again, it was easier for Trump to do that because Rogan was already a fan of his, and all those podcasts he went on, they were supporters of Trump. So it's much easier for Trump to go on those shows because they support him, right? It would have been harder for Kamala to do that because they didn't support her. And I think if she'd gone on to Joe Rogan, he would have pushed back against her a lot, right? I think it would have been. I don't know how good it would have been, but yeah. So again, I think there's a big part of this is that is for the next people to come through, for the next um, uh, Democrats to come through. It can't just be one of the old people that's in there. It can't be not good. Yeah, it can't be Chuck Schumer. It can't be anybody like that. So it must be someone like maybe like AOC. But again, there's this problem, right? So you've got people like Bernie Sanders, you've got AOC, you've got Mandami, but I'm skeptical about how well they would do in a election. Hi, Kate. In like a proper election, like a federal election, all the way. I would hope they would do well, but I just don't know, right? Because again, those states, Wisconsin, that's not how they usually vote, right? They usually vote for someone who's conservative in terms of their approach to life, like sort of gay marriage, all that sort of stuff, trans people, all that sort of stuff. But they're economic populists as well. They want to hear things. Hi, Paolo, good to see you. They want to hear things about their jobs and the Dems can get around this whole cultural thing that they will always try to use against the Democrats is just to talk about politics. Hi, Kimmy, is just talk about politics, right? Just talk about the economy, the economy, the economy, because you can't beat MAGA on culture wars, right? Because I think the majority, I think the majority of Americans, hi Kimmy, I think the majority of Americans are more culturally, right, conservative, right, than they are. So I think on that thing, the other thing I think that I don't think a lot of Americans, especially progressive Americans, like hearing, um, is that I think they're going to have to do something about their messaging on immigration, right? Um, I really do believe this because if you look around the world, I talked about this the other day, is immigration and crime is two areas where Republicans always seem to do quite well, especially when the economy is not going very well, right? So I think they're going to have to increase their messaging. I'm not saying they should take on Trump's policies. Absolutely not, because I think there are a whole bunch of people, right, who looked at what was happening at the border. They didn't understand a lot of it, but they looked at it and they said it was they thought it was not being controlled at all. They just thought it was a shambles, whatever. That's how a lot of people who don't follow politics these days, and there's way too many people who are not interested in politics or they don't follow politics. So it's all about messaging and it's all about vibes. And it looked to a lot of Americans, including independents, right, and swing voters, that the border was out of control or there was no control of the borders, right? So from that point of view, Trump had won. But at the same time, there was a whole bunch of independents, right, And even people like Joe Rogan and all that world. Now, remember, Joe Rogan is now calling out, who voted for Trump and supported him, is now calling out Trump for what he's doing with immigration, right? And what he basically said, and there's a lot of people who fell into this category. They wanted more control of the border, but they didn't want Trump to go to Depot, right? Or farms or hospitality and kick people out who've been here for years and have children. That's not what they wanted, right? They wanted him to get rid of criminals, like criminals, and have a bit more orderly more of an orderly border, right? And so now they're going against Trump. They're saying, "Oh no, he should. Why is he sending people to El Salvador?" Was it? So there is definitely an area for the Democrats to go into where they can say Trump is an authoritarian. Trump is going to Home Depots and putting people who are just hardworking people, right, who've probably been in America for years and have children who are born, and they're taking them back to countries where their children have probably never been to. And a lot of people in the middle hi, Rado, a lot of people in the middle, right, who thought that if my options are Joe Biden, who just there's no control at all, it's just crazy, or Trump, right? Because even though to me, during the last election, I felt like Trump was going to do a lot of this stuff, but I think the reason why they didn't think Trump was going to do a lot of this stuff that he's doing at the moment, even though he talked about it, is that in 2016, Trump said a lot of things and then never ended up doing it, right? And that's because a lot of the people around Trump in 2016 were more traditional Republicans, and they stopped him from doing stuff that he wanted to do. Now now all the people around him now are loyalists. It's not the same 2016 where there's people around him, who are just traditional Republicans, right? So now now it's basically you're seeing the real Donald Trump. So a lot of these people who didn't think he was going to do all that, he was just doing it to get votes, are now sort of turning against him in terms of that. So this leaves a really good middle ground for Democrats at the midterms, at the next election, who will say, look, we don't want to go back to what it was like under Joe Biden. It's worse than this time around. Yeah, it's 100 times worse. Yeah, because there's no one around him anymore. Even Marco Rubio, who was considered more of an establishment person in 2016, 2020, even now he's basically MAGA. He'll just, I can't tell the difference between him and the biggest MAGA supporter out there. So the ones who stuck around, right, just completely capitulated to Trump, right? Like Ted Cruz, Trump says, during primaries in 2016 that Ted Cruz's dad was involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy, calls Ted Cruz's wife ugly, and now he's become biggest Trump supporter. There's something masochistic about the Trump mind. It's like Trump insults other Republicans, right? And they become his biggest supporters. Trump says about his base. I remember a couple of days ago, he posted it on his account that talking about the Trump supporters who are still asking questions about Epstein, saying that those people are weak and they're stupid. Now, the majority of MAGA are obsessed with Epstein, so he's calling the majority of his own base weak and stupid, which I think is right. I mean, he's actually telling the truth, right? They are weak and stupid, but not for that reason. And what did they do? Within 48 hours of them calling them weak and stupid, right? They're back to loving him again, right? It's like Ted Cruz. You have an ugly wife. Your dad killed JFK. 6 months later, his biggest supporter. Little Marco Rubio, he used to call him Little Marco Rubio and stuff like that. Biggest supporter. His base, you're stupid and weak. We love you, Mr. Trump. It's so sad. It's so pathetic. Honestly, it's like one big psyop. It's hard to believe it's real. Yeah, I know. It's hard to believe that what's going on is real. This is my fascination as an Australian. And I think a lot of people, when they see people like me in Australia or the UK, and they're talking about American politics, and a lot of MAGA will say to me, it's got nothing to do with you. It's none of your business. You're Australian and stuff like that. Well, I would say to that is America is the most powerful country in the world, right? And what happens in America affects the whole planet. He's putting tariffs on my country. He's putting tariffs on Europe. So we're not talking about some small little country. that Trump has control of. We're talking about a country that has the biggest military, the biggest economy, and all that. So it's absolutely okay for other countries like mine to talk about it or think about it as well, because it impacts the whole world. Um, so from that point of view, I'm not going to apologize for talking about, America. And also, I love Americans, like, the people on here, the people who didn't vote for Trump. I have the biggest love for Americans ever. And that's part of the reason why I'm interested in this, because I've met so many Americans in real life. I traveled with Americans when I was backpacking for Europe in the 90s, when I was in my 20s. And I love them. They're so open, beautiful people. Yeah. So the whole thing is like, but for us, the reason we're fascinated by it is, that's okay. It is because it is so crazy to us to believe that it's actually happening, because this wouldn't happen in Australia. I can't see it happening in Europe. I can't see it happening in England, not to this extent, right? Where you have a person who is a reality TV star, right? Who basically got elected, right? And then basically surrounded himself last year or this year with Fox News reporters, um, you know, other reality TV stars, and basically said to the whole of America during the debate last year that a group of Haitians were eating cats and dogs, right? And that Mexicans are generally bad rapists and all this, but there's a couple of good ones. And yet a significant amount of those people from those demographics voted for him. Like, I really like hearing your perspective, because he's the threat to everyone, not just, well, yeah, it is. It is, Melissa. And I think in Australia, we do two things. Like I remember I was talking to Joe Walsh a couple of months ago, about a month ago, from the ex-congressman. Um, and he said, "Oh, you guys laugh at us, but you feel sorry for us." And that's true. I do. I laugh because I feel like when, something horrible is happening, sometimes laughing can make it's like, I don't know, it's like coping mechanism. Also, he just does such stupid things that it's hard not to laugh. You know, um, I mean, the fact that the fact and the also, but we also feel bad for you. I mean, I feel really bad. I mean, I can't imagine if I was living in America and I was and and the country voted in this person like Trump, right? I would just be horrified. I don't know, and especially when only 30% of Americans voted for him, right? So, because in America, not a lot of people voted, so it only took 30%, right? So, and also you got the electoral college vote. So it's like if you're living in California or New York or some other place, it's like your vote doesn't really count. So, I do think that the national, having getting rid of the electoral college, and by the way, there's a bigger argument now for Democrats to make about getting rid of the electoral college vote, and that is because Trump won the last popular vote. So in the past, they would, Trump, the Republicans would say, well, no, because Democrats always win, and it's not fair because then you'll just have everyone pandering to California and New York, and nobody would consider the people who live in small states, right? So it would be unfair, right? I kind of get that argument to some degree, but I actually think that's a wrong way to think about it, because it will mean that everybody's vote will count. And the people in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, their vote will also still count, right? It's not like their votes are no longer going to count, right? So everybody's vote's going to count. And the fact that Trump won the popular vote should give them hope that, okay, you can still win. Republicans can still win an election, right? So I think from that point of view, it's a positive thing in terms of, getting rid of that. But yeah, it's just a crazy thing for us in Australia to see what's going on over there. We do feel really bad for you. I mean, I do feel really bad as someone who follows America. I'd like to see the blue states stop subsidizing these red states. The red states voted for Trump. Yeah. Well, the other thing is, that whenever there's like a natural disaster, like there was in California, all Trump did was blame DEI. He blamed Gavin Newsom. He blamed, all these things. I think they found there was like one lesbian woman who worked in the fire department or something, and he sort of mentioned her because she was DEI. I don't know. It was just the weirdest thing, right? But then you have these floods in in Texas, right? You have the floods in Texas. And Trump is like, and people are saying like, oh, you you defunded the warning systems in the government. And he's like, what are you doing? Why are you politicizing a natural disaster? Like, I mean, it's not like what happened in California happened 10 years ago. It happened a few months ago. And all he did was politicize the California fires. And then 2 months later, he's like, well, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Why are you politicizing these floods? It's just a natural disaster. Nobody could have done anything about it. So it's just this, like, I kind of feel like America is now living on a different planet. I also don't feel like Trump could have won and succeeded as well as he did without social media, right? Because I think had Trump come about 20 years ago when mainstream media was still the main thing, I don't think he would have won because everybody would be watching the similar news, right? Everyone would be reading this correct joke, but the red states feel exactly what Trump has done to them. Trump will lie and like, yeah. But I honestly can't, I only feel like Trump can win in this day and age because of the way people engage with news. It's everyone is watching different news, right? So he can say stuff like about California and then say stuff and completely contradict himself 2 months later in Texas because he knows that most people aren't paying attention, right? Um, and if most people are not paying attention like they used to, I remember the old days, like politicians would like they'd be in the primaries and then they do something, they'd say one silly thing or do one silly thing, right? And then suddenly that person would stop. They come out and apologize and they'd stop running. Like that's what it used to be like. Like, I don't know if you remember, it was years ago, like 2000. I don't see my memories here. I think it was 2004. There was a guy called Howard Dean, um, and Howard Dean was it Howard? I think it was Howard Dean. He was a Democrat running for in the primaries at the elections, and he was doing really well. And then he got up at a rally and he did this like screech, like that, like it was like nothing, like it just the way he just screeched or yelled or something, right? So that got played over and over again in the media, and he ended up losing his primary because of that one incident where he kind of sounded a bit weird for 1 second. Now, fast forward to now, there is no way in hell that anybody would. Now, I don't believe, yeah, ended his campaign. I know, but Melissa, think about that. What happened? What just an insanely minor thing, right? His voice just went because he was screeching, right? Because he's probably been talking all day. That ended his campaign. But Trump found liable of sexual assault, of multiple things, trying to overthrow the government, right? 100 indictments, everything against him, and he still won in 2024. Like, screech this. Yeah, Kimmy. Yeah, it was two. Yeah, Kimmy, look up Howard Dean. I'm sure it's Howard Dean. Yeah, look up Howard Dean. Um, yeah, I think it is. But anyway, look up the screech and you'll see it. And it was a big thing at the time in 2024. It was just after, yeah, it was just after when I kind of started following American politics after 9/11. So I was kind of into it at that stage and things like that. But yeah, it was a big thing at the time. And it just goes to show how much it's changed now that in some ways, I think he shouldn't have, that should have happened to him, right? Just doing that one little screech shouldn't have ended his career, right? That's just ridiculous. On the other hand, being found liable of sexual assault, right, also should actually end your career, right? So I guess what I'm saying is it's got to be like a middle ground, correct? But almost all the main media is afraid to say anything against Trump. Only a very few will say the truth. Yeah, I know. The other thing that's actually like really hard as well for the media, and I actually feel a little bit sorry for him in this area, right? Not talking about Fox News, is that Trump lies so much and he says so many crazy stuff that it's really hard to keep up. You know what I mean? It's really hard to keep up with everything. He probably lies 100 times a day and says stupid stuff like that. So if you're the media, how do you keep up with that? Like if you just constantly, because here's the thing, right? You end up getting overwhelmed with all this information. And most people are not paying attention to politics, or they're too busy. They might have like full-time jobs, they might have two jobs, they might have kids at home, right? They haven't got time to read through 100 lies of a politician, right? So that's how so by overwhelming the public with so much bullshit, you get away with it. And Trump gets graded on a curve. Trump gets graded on a curve like a toddler does. Hi, Boston. Hi, Melinda. Hi, Richard. And he gets graded on a curve like I have never seen another politician graded on a curve like Trump. Like literally, he could just say, sometimes I feel like he'll come out and test how much he's graded on a curve on purpose, like, by calling his supporters, hi, Paul, by calling his supporters weak, by calling his supporters like stupid, like, hi, Charlene. Um, he's basically, feel like he's thinking, oh, you know what? There's literally nothing I can say. And the other thing is, in 2016, when he said, I could shoot someone and I wouldn't lose a vote, he knew back then he was creating a cult, right? So, again, he just gets like, now if a Democrat, right, comes out and says, like 5% of what Trump says, they would be crucified in the media, not just Fox News, but all media, right? Because Democrats don't get graded on the curve. There is an interesting psychological experiment that's happening in America, right? And it's not just to do with Trump, it's to do with humans, right? It's that if you do something all the time, you will get away with it. We're teaching people a lesson that if you lie all the time, you won't get caught out. Eventually, people will get overwhelmed by it, that they stop listening to you, that they stop thinking that you're lying, right? And the people who lie, it's like when you have two children, right? And one of your children does, 99% of the time, they never lie, they never do anything silly. And you've got another kid who lies all the time or just plays up all the time. And parents, for some reason, the kid that does something is always, well behaved. As soon as they do something bad, it's like, whoa, what are you doing? Because they're not used to it. But the kid who's always not well behaved and does something good one time, they're like, oh my God, let's take him out for ice cream. Let's get him a new bike. Let's get him the new Nintendo Switch. It's like this human nature thing, right? Remember when um, Joe Biden, we found out that he had cancer, and then Trump. Now we all know Trump never sent this, but there was on his social media account, Trump put this normal email like post that was, we'd like to thank Melania and I feel really sorry for them, and we wish them the best. It was like that, the usual thing that most people would do. And I looked at that and I thought, there's no way in hell Trump wrote that. There's just no way, no way. No. And what was funny about that is that even Fox News and his supporters were like, oh, look at what Trump said. Now, if a Democrat said that, they would just assume that would be okay. It would be like, well, yeah, we expected that. Nobody would even mention it. You wouldn't go, oh, Joe Biden said he wishes this person well because they got cancer. You wouldn't even mention it. His supporters wouldn't mention it. People around would be like, yeah, okay, of course he did that. But because Trump did it, he got this like ticker tape parade by everybody. It was like, oh my God, did you see? And you say Joe's, that bite. It's like, why? Why let's just assume for a minute that he did write that. Why does he get such praise for writing something that everyone else would write and did write about anybody else, right? Why does he get that extra praise? And it's this thing that is really bad that's happening at the moment where Trump, because he never does that stuff, he's been rewarded for doing double standards. Yeah, he's been rewarded for doing something else everyone else does. Like, he gets rewarded for it. And so Joe Biden says things like that, nobody cares, So it's, what is this teaching, like, other politicians who are coming through, younger politicians, right? What is this teaching it? What's it teaching younger people, right? It's teaching younger politicians who are coming through that if you act well and you act well behaved and you do standard stuff, that you're just going to be considered part of the establishment, and that you're going to be, in a way, I guess, boring. You're not going to be exciting. And that someone like Trump, right, who just lies all the time, gets away with it because nobody can keep up with his lies. And then when he does occasionally do something good, it's like, oh my, he gets the tickets over it. And I'm sure Trump knows this because this is from look, one of my things that I shouldn't hi Cynthia. One of the things that I do like doing in my spare time, which I'm not to be bullied, is like, yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, I do have a little bit of a thing for some reality TV. I'll just admit it. And Trump is a reality TV guy, right? And in reality TV, they what they do is they want to create stories, right, and characters, and it can't just. Be, they want to start with someone who's a bad person, and then that bad person over time we get to know that person, and then we thought, actually, you know what? He's not as bad as I thought he was. And then when that bad, the bad person, he does something good, and then everyone's like, the woman, it might be a man, and then the woman's like, oh my God, I hated him. I thought he was an asshole, but you know, he's actually, the other day, he made me a coffee. I couldn't believe it. He actually made me a coffee. What a great person. So you get rewarded, so then he's kind of building this character, right? Where he could just be an asshole all the time. And then when he occasionally do something right, he's trained the media, he's trained a whole bunch of people in his base, and maybe some independents, right? And some people that when he does something nice, it sticks, right? Because you're not used to it. But if you do, so everything nice that he does or says, it gets highlighted by everybody because everyone's shocked that he's done it, right? But again, like it's a reality TV thing. It's where you try, no, the character in reality TV show who's nice, who doesn't insult people, who's just nice from start to finish, never gets any airtime because they're considered like boring, right? So he knows how to get airtime, and this is where I think Donald Trump is good, is that he knows how to get eyeballs. And in this time, I know you're correct. I'm just tired of these people who know absolutely nothing about government and how it runs to be politicians. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and what like the thing is that Trump knows nothing about policy, right? The amount of times that he's been in his Oval Office and, there's like media there and he'll have like his health minister there or whatever, and someone there, and they'll ask a question and he'll just go, oh, you answer that. He has no idea, right? He has concepts of plans he wouldn't understand. When in 2017, when he got into politics, when he got elected, right, he kept getting asked about a healthcare policy, which he kept talking about getting the best one. Um, and then constantly saying that, it's going to be a beautiful healthcare. And then he gets in, and then when he gets in, they ask him again about a healthcare policy, and he said, nobody knows how complicated this is. Nobody knows how complicated. It's really complicated. Nobody knows. Yeah, they did. They did. People did know that healthcare was complicated, but you didn't. Like Obama, when he was in power, whether you liked him or not, he understood policy, right? And he understood healthcare. Like I remember, like back in the day when he was talking about getting rid of pre-existing conditions, and he'd go on TV and he'd talk about the details. He'd go Section 8.9, Section 7.6.8. I was like, wow, this guy knows his shit, right? Now, in a lot of countries like Australia and Europe and England, that would just be considered like normal. You would expect the person to know policy in detail, right? They would have cabinet ministers like for healthcare who go into more detail, but they would be over, they'd understand a lot of the information, right? And yet Trump is considered in his base as some sort of, I miss Obama so much. Yeah. I mean, I miss someone who can communicate, right? And do it. But I was thinking about this the other day, Kimmy, is that I don't know if Obama in this day and age would do as well as he did back then. Because I don't know if social media is really his area. Because in social media, the people who do seem to do the best are people who come across very natural, like they just seem like someone you met on the street. You know what I mean? Like just some guy just walked out of his house and starts talking. That's the person that does well. Obama, was a great talker, great rhetorically, right? But he's at a level, right, that is beyond the average person, right? And for that time, it was perfect. For this time, I think it could come across as unauthentic, right? Or not, mainstream, not unmainstream enough. No, you need something like Pete Buttigieg. Yeah, Pete Buttigieg, I agree, Car. You know, Pete Buttigieg goes on all these. I don't know if you. I mean, unfortunately, I watched all these podcasts on um, Joe Rogan, all that stuff. He didn't go Joe Rogan, but he went a lot of the ones around him, like Andrew Schultz and a couple of other people, and he did amazing, right? Because he knows how to talk to him, right? He goes on Fox News, or he cut his teeth on Fox News, right? And I think it's easier for him because people to judge grew up in an area where there's a lot of conservatives around him, right? And so if you grow up with conservatives around you, I think it's easier for you to communicate with them if you're a politician. If you grew up in California and you're surrounded, Joe H, I do think this country would elect a gay man. Do I think? Um, yeah. So I don't. So personally, me, I'm not sure that it would elect a gay man, but I think if there's any gay man that could be elected, it would be Pete Buttigieg. Um, and I'll explain why. Because I don't think he would be elected, to be honest. But I do think that he would have the best chance. And the reason I think he's got the best chance is because he is not from California or New York, right? He's from kind of a working class area. Um, and he also is willing to go on shows that those people watch in the Midwest states, right? Um, and he even jokes around about being gay. And like, I think a lot of people in those working class areas and stuff like that, they would look at him and go, "Oh, he doesn't take himself seriously," right? He's willing to joke about himself, about this. Then he talks about he talks a lot of stuff about economics. So when he went on this Andrew Schultz show, which is like a friend of Joe Rogan, he's got massive audience. This guy Andrew Schultz, he said the reason why people should vote for Democrats is not because of the culture wars. He goes, whether you think whether you like me because I'm gay or not, I don't really care. He goes, I've grown up with people who didn't like me, but I still respected those people. He said the reason you should vote for us, and he goes, at the end of the day, who you vote for has has little to do with the culture wars, but who you vote for has a lot to do with your economic lifestyle. So he will talks about the child credits, credits. He was talking about increasing the minimum wage. He talked about all that stuff, and then I looked over at Andrew, the guy he was talking to, and he was like, "Yeah." He was like, "Yeah," because he didn't get stuck. He didn't take himself seriously. He didn't get stuck in the culture wars, and he talked about the economy, and everything he talked about would be big ticks for people living in Wisconsin, in those states. So again, I still feel like he wouldn't get voted in, but I actually think he would do way better than people realize. Way better than people realize. Maybe as a vice president, a VP, he could do it as a VP maybe. But yeah, I actually don't know. When I think about the Democrats, there's nobody who really stands out to me. Like there is Pete Buttigieg, but then he's gay. I don't know. Like there's Josh Shapiro, but again, Josh kind of feels like the older establishment type of Democrat, but maybe that's what's going to work in the mid states. I don't know. Maybe we'll see. But Pete is so intelligent person when it has a sense of humor. Yeah, exactly. And when you go on those podcasts, right? And unfortunately, it's just part of reality that a lot of people watch that stuff, especially working class and young voters, right? And that's what you need to win, right? Democrats can't win, right, without bringing back the working class people. Also, it's also like a messaging thing as well, because if working class people are voting for Republicans, right, then that makes the Democrats' whole thing of being the party for working class people that disappears. You've got to get rid of that lie, because it's actually not true. I love Pete, but he'd have a tough time maybe, or Bashir. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that the Democrats need to do is get rid of this story, this fake story, which has got into a lot of the people who live in working class areas. They've started to believe that Republicans, or specifically MAGA, is for the working class people, and Democrats are for the elites. And I think as long as we get that, is a really big thing for them. They got to change that narrative, right? Because it's actually not true, but it's out there. The other one is young people. Democrats need to bring young people back, because there is absolutely no reason why young people should be voted for Republican, right? Because they're not talking about homes. They're not talking about rent prices. They're just talking about trans people in sport and talking about because they know that if you listen to a lot of people on Twitter, if you listen to a lot, I'm talking about young men mostly here, young men on Twitter, young men who watch the podcast, they're obsessed with trans people in sport. They're obsessed with the culture wars, right? Why? Because it's easy to digest. If you're like a 19-year-old, 21-year-old who's not really that, I wouldn't say that well educated, right? You're not looking at the policies, right? It's easier to digest information about there's this trans person playing sports, right? In somewhere in America. That's easy thing for a young person to digest. They can get around that. But if you talk about healthcare, they're like, that's boring. I don't know about much. They're not. So as the interesting thing is, as people get older, uneducated, you could say it. Yeah, uneducated. As people get older, they do seem to move away from that sort of podcast world, and they do so, and also things never stay the same. So at the moment, there's definitely younger people moving towards the Republican side. Also, I think we can do better, right? As left wing people, and I'm saying this as an Australian because I my, I have a stepson who's got who went to university, and then there were people who support Andrew Tate at the university handing out like information on Andrew Tate to go online and join, right? So I think Democrats are Kentucky governor. Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, Bashir, yeah, could be, yeah. It's hard to say. I think the Democrats need a really good primaries, and I think that was one of the things that went wrong at the last election. Not having obviously we didn't have enough time because Biden didn't move aside quick enough, but having a primary will really get people to see what's going on out there, right? And see who's kind of doing it. Maybe someone might pop up in the next couple of years. But yeah, I don't see one I'm not just, I'm not looking around. See, when Barack Obama was around, it was an obvious choice. Do you know what I mean? For me, it was anyway. I was like, that's got to be the guy, you know, that's got to be the person who does it. I thought, but I don't really see that at the moment. But yeah, but I just think that Democrats need to win back a lot of the working class people, and they need to win back a lot of the young people. And I think we've got to give young people, especially young men, we have too many geriatrics that need to retire. Yeah, we do. There's just too many old people. Look, and when young people look at something in the Democratic Party, yeah, when young people look at politicians, they want to see themselves reflected in it. And I think the problem with the Democrats and the left in the last couple of years or 5 years is this thing where if you look at young people where young, especially young men, right, where they go online, podcasting, all that, not all, but like a lot of young men, especially young men who've got problems, there's no alternatives for them for on the left, right? The left is calling them toxic, not everybody, but toxic, or you're this, or you're bad, or you're this. And the right is saying they're embracing them. The right is embracing young men. You can joke about whatever you want. We don't expect you to be perfect. You can do this, you can do that. Come with us, right? Okay. And on the left, what's the alternative? Like, who's there to say, hey, you fucked up. You made a mistake. Sure, no worry. I think we need to be more forgiving of younger people, especially young men, young men, young women. I don't think younger women make as many do as stupid, to be honest, as it. I'm saying this as a man. Like, I think younger men do stupider stuff than younger women, right? But I also, as a man who grew up at a time, you know, I knew people who were idiots in their teenage years and in the 20s are now completely different people. Like, I mean, completely different people, right? So people do change and they do grow out of it. And I think we could do better to, obviously, I'm not talking about the extreme versions, people like Andrew Tate type people or things like that. But the reason why people do go there, we're talking about people who are teenagers and in their early 20s, is because generally you find they have broken homes, right? They come from a poor family, broken homes, and they're looking for someone or something to embrace them, right? And they're looking around and they're not only seeing things on the right. And honestly, it's mostly 90% on the right. Um, and so I think as Democrats, like I sometimes when I'm on Twitter, I will talk to people who are MAGA, and I'll usually start with like making fun of them or joking, and then they make fun of me. They call me, glad there was no social media. And yeah, exactly, yeah, exactly, yeah. And we've got to be more. I think we have to be. If a person does something stupid, or they don't have the same views as us when it comes to everything culturally, as long as they're not saying things like bashing people up because they're gay or something like that. I'm just saying, like, oh, someone comes up. I remember. Let me tell you a story. I remember I grew up in Sydney, which is like one of the most open, like it's the gay capital of I think besides San Francisco, right? So I grew up in an inner city area, right? I was working for this company in marketing, right? I was only like 21, and I grew up around gay people my whole life because of where I lived. And we got one guy who came and worked for us, and he was from like the western suburbs, which is like in the outside, right? That area is like it's poor area. We're very working class. His parents were like gays of this, gays of that. So he grew up around that environment. So we grew up same age, different environment, right? And he came into my workplace, and we were downstairs. I was a smoker back then, not anymore. And we were having a cigarette downstairs, and he was saying, "Oh, because it was marketing, there was a lot of gay people that worked there, right? Not generalizing." And then basically, he was like, "Oh, there's a lot of," and he knew I was straight because I had a girlfriend. And he was like, "Oh, there's a lot of like, gay people here," and it was kind of like this and that. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, but they're great. Have you met them?" No, no. Within 2 weeks, because it was a very social place, because it was marketing Friday nights, he'd come out with a group of us from work. He was like, we'd all went out one Friday night. He got along well with like two of the gay guys that lived there. They were like doing karaoke together, end of it together. And he came in on the Monday, went down for a cigarette, and he said, "They're the best people I've ever met in my life. The nicest people I've ever met in my life." Right? And he almost had like a tear in his eye, like Donald Trump, he says, "Oh, I got a tear in my," right? So it just goes to show that taught me that I could have easily been hypocritical. I could have been very judgmental of that guy. He was, young, like he was my age, but he didn't grow up like I do. He grew up completely different to I do, and had never encountered an openly gay person in his life, and been around parents, especially a dad, who demonized gay people. But when he experienced it and when he met them and stuff like that, he was completely different to it, right? That guy I met years later is a completely different person, right? So I think we need to, your presence, thanks, Kieran. I think we need to be like a little bit more accepting of younger people for saying stupid stuff or making mistakes and stuff like that, and bringing them back in, not to to encourage that behavior, but to say that there is another option for you, right? Where you can make edgy jokes, and you can listen to comedians, and we're not going to cancel you because of that. But but at the same time, we're going to offer you this other economic stuff, because the economic stuff is what used to get left wing people voted. Like talking about culture stuff is a newish thing, right? It is a newish thing in Western society. If you look around, like back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, left wing parties were not talking about. In fact, people old enough here to remember the 90s, there was that thing called, everyone used to talk about political correctness. But back then, it was left wing people making fun of right wing people for being too politically correct. We're talking about the Christians, right? The Christian people who would get like upset about, gay people being together or whatever like that. It was flipped. It was the other way around. And it was the left wing people who were making the edgy jokes, the edgy stuff. You catch more beats with Hummy. Exactly, Kim. Yeah. And you don't have to agree with what they say or do. And you could even, but I think it got to a degree where we alienated groups that didn't need to be alienated. And then if you don't give people an option, and that's the only option that they've been accepted into, then that's where they're going to go. Now, eventually, as they get older, right, like the whole incel thing, right, with guys, right, the whole incel thing where, it's like basically involuntary, like because they've never been with a girl, right, and that's because most of them live at home. They're socially probably not great, whatever it is, and then they get told that the reason that they're not getting a girlfriend is not because of them, it's because the girls, right? the girls, it's their fault, right? And because they don't have many real life relationships with women. It's all based on what they're being told online. There's no reference point for them, right? If you meet a guy who dates girls and he's 21 or whatever and stuff like that, he's not going to buy into that stuff because he's like, well, no, it's not. Because I'm out there every day socializing with people, not online, but so he knows it's all bullshit. But if you got a 14-year-old or 15-year-old who doesn't have a real life reference point, that's all they believe. And also they're being told it's not your fault, it's their fault. So of course a 14-year-old wants to believe it's someone else's fault and not his fault. So I think from that point of view, I do feel sympathy for these people because I've seen it in my real life when I was younger, and I've seen these people evolve into something completely different. And also those incel groups, a lot of times what happens is as they get older, right, they might get a job, right? And then when they get a job, they're forced to interact with actual real women, not the women, yeah. And then they start going, oh, actually, that's not what I was told. Not every girl wants a guy who's 6'6" with $20 million. Because if that was the case, I have to go now, Joe. Thank you. Good night, everyone. See you, Melissa. Nice talking with you. So I think, from that point of view, I think it's a positive thing that we try to be a little bit more open-minded with. And again, I'm not talking about the older ones. I'm talking about teenagers, people in their early 20s, because there's certainly, we can certainly get those people back into the left wing circles. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if we can do that. But yeah, so basically, I think the Democrats can win back a lot of working class people, and they can win back a lot of young guys. And um and Trump just lied to these people, right? He lied to these people over and over again. He went on their podcast, what they listened to, and told them what they wanted to hear. He told working class people he was going to be on their side. None of that is happening, right? At the moment, inflation's going up, right? He never released the Epstein files, which is something that, a lot of people in that group were very obsessed with, right? So he's not doing a lot of the things that he said he's going to do. The problem is he lied through his teeth before he got elected, and now a lot of it's coming back to haunt him. Now, the thing about the groups that voted for him in 2024 is that for Democrats, it might not just be about getting them to vote for you, because I'm not sure that these groups would switch to the Democrats because they've been so, they don't like, there's going to be a struggle with the Christian Nationalists and the Heritage Foundation. Yeah. Yeah. But I think, yeah, you're right, Jenny. I think the trying to get these people back into the party might not, you can try. I think young people are definitely, working class people are definitely more gettable because they vote mostly on economics, right? But I think with young people, what you can do is you can get to a stage where they're not as motivated to vote for Trump or a MAGA person, right? Because they were very motivated to vote for Trump, right? Because young people don't usually vote; they don't vote at the same rate as older people do, right? And so, therefore, if you can get them not motivated, right, to vote for Trump, then not going out to vote, which is what they usually don't do, is enough to help the Democrats, right? So, and I think that's what's going to happen. I think the motivation they had to get up and vote, which is something unusual for young people, won't be there in 2024, and especially won't be there if Trump's not there, because they were very attracted to what Trump was saying. He was going on all their podcasts. I think it's going to be a different field in 2028. I think the Democrats will be also appearing on that podcast. The Democrats will also have a good story to tell. Here's a great story for Democrats to tell at the next election. They can say, 4 years ago, Trump came on all your shows and he lied through his teeth. So I'm not going to do that. You know what I mean? What a great story to go on those podcasts to say. He said to you guys he was going to release the files. He never did it. He lied to you. He came on, he said he was going to do all these things. He never did it. He said he was going to start a war. He bombed Iran, right? He said he said he was going to stop the wars in 24 hours. He never did it, right? He said he was going to make inflation go backwards. He made it worse, right? I don't think inflation is going to get better in 4 years' time. So they're going to have this incredible story to go on this podcast and basically say Trump used you guys. He actually used you to get you guys to endorse him and to vote for him. Because again, a lot of the podcast world, they're not full-on MAGA supporters, they're anti-establishment people, right? They're anti, they don't want to be, they're anti-deep state, whatever that means, right? The anti-establishment. So they only vote for whoever they think is the outsider, right? And a lot of podcasters, they vote on vibes, right? And that's why that some of them like Bernie Sanders, because they thought Bernie Sanders was also the outsider, right? They're not voting on actual policies. So I think the Democrats have a really good story at the next election to go on all these podcasts and and basically expose it. And I think because of that, and because it's not going to be Trump, it's probably going to be JD Vance, who's I just can't see JD Vance, you know, I can't see a 19 or 20-year-old guy looking at JD Vance and going, yeah, like he's not, he doesn't have the same thing. Trump is like, um, he just says crazy. It just doesn't. It doesn't work with JD Vance. JD Vance comes across as too educated, right? Trump comes across as uneducated. Trump, So I think that I think JD Vance just comes across as too establishment for what they are. He looks like an insider. He looks too, he's too educated. They don't like that. That's not their world, right? So I think the young people aren't going to come out to vote for him as much. The midterms is great for the Democrats because the midterms is generally so what happened in 2024 is that the people who generally voted for MAGA were people who were less informed about politics. So they did the polling afterwards. So people who didn't follow politics as much or didn't follow the news overwhelmingly voted for Trump, and people who followed politics and followed the news overwhelmingly voted for Kamala Harris, right? So the thing about the midterm elections is that generally midterm elections is based on low turnout and people who are more keen to get out and vote. And Donald Trump is not on the ballot during the midterms, right? And when Donald Trump is not on the ballot, they generally do bad, whether it's midterms or special elections, right? And then it becomes more of a localized thing, and localized things generally work better for the Democrats. So a lot of people are saying, they're looking at the Democrats' polling numbers, which is really bad, like awful. It's actually awful. But you've got to put it into context, right? They lost the election. A lot of Democrats probably thinking they're not going hard enough against Trump, right? And secondly, there's no leader. There's no leader of the Democratic Party. You got Chuck Schumer and all that, but there's no real proper leader, right? So of course the Democrats are not going to be hugely popular when you poll them because there's no leader. They're lost, whatever. But when you go to special elections, the Democrats do amazing, right? Because suddenly you have a candidate, you now have policies, and it's all very localized. Trump supporters aren't into like localized elections. They want to see Trump on the ballot, right? So for that reason, I think it's going to be really good for the midterms. Hopefully between now, the problem is that Trump and MAGA know that the midterm will probably make Donald Trump a lame duck president, right? Because if they lose Congress, right, he will be a lame duck president. He won't. That's why they're trying to get so many things through at the moment, right? Because they know they've only got probably to the midterms, and it all depends on how much damage you can do between now and the midterms, right? To see what can happen. Because if he does too much damage, especially with the courts, starts ignoring the courts, that could be a problem because now suddenly, gerrymandering is another big problem. So there's a lot of stuff there that can happen between now and then. I do hope that American democracy can exist. Hi, Alice. Nice to see you. I do hope American democracy can exist can stay between now and the midterm elections. I think there are some positives. I think the positives is he won't. It's obvious now he's not going to run again. And as I said before, he's not going to run again just because he can't, but because he's just way too sick. He's got those like the cankles problem, which it's fine. He's got big ankles. I worry like Kimmy. Yeah, I totally get it, Kimmy. Why you would worry, but I do think there is some hope, right? And that hope is that Trump is. It's almost 99% he's not going to run again, right? And you can't replicate Trump, right? And if you can't replicate Trump, you can't replicate that enthusiasm, right? Therefore, the Democrats, and the other thing is people, I think, in the Republican Party as you get closer and closer to the next election, the midterms, right? Trump has power as long as he's popular. Trump has power as long as the people in the Republican Party feel like if they go against him, he could like ruin their lives, whatever. But if Trump becomes so unpopular that Republicans stop caring about that he becomes a liability, once Trump becomes a liability for the Republican Party, right, then they would jump ship. They will absolutely jump ship. The problem with that is that even though, the base will always stick with Trump, right? The base will always stick with Trump. So they'll lose old Republicans. They might lose, some of the Republicans. They might lose the swing voters who voted for Trump. They might lose the independents, right? But the base, they're going to stick with Trump. So what happens is if Trump becomes hugely unpopular, but it still is very popular with this small base, let's just say the base is like 20% or whatever, whatever it is, right? You need that next leader is going to need that MAGA base to win. Because even if they pick up all the independents, the establishment Republicans, some Democrat or centrist Democrats, whatever it is, right? They can't win without MAGA's base. And if Trump tells them to stay home and don't vote, right, that would be great for Democrats, but I don't think it's going to be great for the next Republican, right? So that's why I don't think anybody's going to throw Trump under the bus, even if it becomes unpopular, because no one in previous administrations ever had a base like Trump has, right? They're not malleable. They can't, again, he called them stupid and he called them weak, and they're back to like embracing him, like how, I mean, we now know, like it was, a lot of people were like, is it a cult? Yes, it is. When you call your own base stupid and weak, right? And you stay with that person, like there's not much. I don't know how you can deny it's a cult, right? So they're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. So the next Republican has to deal with that, and the only way they can deal with that is to maybe create a middle line where they're kind of like, just saying that we need new leadership. He's getting too old and all that sort of stuff. But again, it's going to be difficult for the next election. I think personally, Tucker Carlson is going to run. I really do. I think he's setting himself up to run at the moment. He's going to run. And again, even though he's criticizing Trump, he's also at the same time not throwing him under the bus completely, which says to me that he knows he needs him. He knows he needs Trump for the next election. And maybe Trump might actually end up endorsing him. You never know, because Trump will want to endorse a winner. Because Trump endorsing someone at the next election and going out and doing rallies on their behalf all the time, he would feel like he would, and that candidate lost, he would feel like he lost himself, right? So I think if he didn't like Tucker Carlson, or if he thought Tucker Carlson was criticizing too much, but then Tucker Carlson reached out to him and said, "No, look, let's work together." I think Trump would embrace Tucker, because then he'd think that he'd have a winner behind him, right? Hi, Eddie. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think Trump could end up endorsing Tucker, even though Tucker's kind of moving away from him, because Tucker represents the populist part of the party, right? And he's also ex-Fox News. So a lot of the older Republicans know him as well, because a lot of the online people, the MAGA people online, the Fox News people have not, because you've got people at Fox News, the average age is 75 and above, right? The people online, the MAGA people, is like people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. So they're two different demographics, right? And so the good thing about Tucker for MAGA is that he's been in both of those demographics. He was hugely popular at Fox News, and he's hugely popular on Twitter and online. So he can get both of those MAGA groups into him, as with some of the other people like Laura Loomer or those type of, nobody in the mainstream world really knows who they are. They're more online. So, and generally speaking, as we know, older people vote. So you need to get the Fox News people out there voting for you. But on the other hand, the older demographics will eventually like pass away, and there's new groups of people coming through. We saw that with Zohran Mamdani in New York, where he picked up a lot of the people who were too young to vote for Andrew Kumar or Eric Adams at the last election, but they just voting for the first time. He got a lot of new people registered to vote. And I think that's what the Democrats need to do. They need to go after young people, people who don't usually vote, and get them registered to vote. Registered to vote for the first time, because those people have never voted at a previous election. They're great people to get. I have to run, but thanks for doing this. No worries, Kimmy. Thank you. So anyway, I have to run as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. I've had a lot of fun. Sorry, Eddie, I know you just joined, but I'm just leaving. Thank you. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the Joe Thomas newsletter, and I'll do some other podcast newsletters later. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Bye.